Let's go back and figure out what has happened last 15 years. I see many young people here, and I'm sure those who don't have gray hair or are not, haven't lost their hair, those who want to hide it, don't know what interest rates are. So let's start from the beginning. Now let's start with Finance 101. Okay, Finance 101 is what is happiness equals positive cash flow. All right. So, but that notion disappeared mysteriously in 2008. So let's go back. What happened then? What happened then in 2008 is right after Universa was formed, and on an excellent 2007-2008 market collapse. So for us, it's a good memory. I mean, good memory in the sense that it was financially good, but in New York City, you could see in faces that things were not good. And then the Federal Reserve somehow, extremely amateurishly, decided that lowering rate to zero would fix the problem. So they put interest rates at close to zero, effectively at zero. Sometimes, interest rates really were negative, as in many places, including Europe. I know because I had an account in Europe. Interest rates at zero are not proven to be more effective than interest rates at 3%. But guess what? Once you put them at zero, it's very hard to raise them. What did interest rates at zero bring? Tumors. Okay. What is a tumor? It's an organism that grows without control because it's uncontrolled. There's no mechanism to bring it back to what it should be. You have Bitcoin, but you also have something called real estate. Real estate, you buy a house, and then someone else bids higher for your house, and then you feel rich and you go and spend the money. And then someone else bids higher for your house, and then you borrow against. So there's something called interest rate at zero and something called real estate that created illusory wealth of over $100 trillion. So what happened? They fixed an economic problem, naming too much debt in 2007. With what? With more debt. They fixed an economic problem with a monetary solution, which is supposed to be a short-term thing. So people invoke Keynes. Keynes himself understood that it was a temporary measure. Most deficits, and even those who understood monetary policy, it's not meant to be a structural correction. Structural correction would have been to turn debt into equity, but the old-fashioned way. You go bankrupt, then you have new owners, and then history continues. That's life, like nature. So the problem is a lot of people have bad habits. So let me ask you, all the people you've met belong to that category of interest rate naive people. Let's simply, we would derive the answer from looking at how things, are taking place currently. In the old days, you start a company, and when you got listed on New York Stock Exchange after having two positive, that was the old days. So you made money when your company, simple. And then look at the billionaires, because nobody cares about billionaires. He is no longer his number 23, he was 24, maybe next year, let's forecast. No, anyway. But look at these billionaires. How did they become rich? They become rich from valuation, not from cash flow. You see? So you got rich over that period by funding, third round, now the company is worth $2 billion. It's all paper, for God's sake, it's paper. So that modus is gone. They don't realize what's going on because it takes a while and because they don't have the education. When you spend 15 years in that environment, you don't know finance. So they don't realize what's hitting them. So you have to go to people who either have gray hair or happen to have a library. or have a grandfather, grand uncle, great grandfather, someone to talk to, because to see what's happening. It is much worse than you think. Okay, so all these companies were using the stock market and or private or some round 21 investor, okay, as what? As cash machine. You want cash? No problem. Round whatever. We get cash. Oh, the company now is valued more. Okay, and everybody's happy or was happy. So now you got to make money. We see it with Twitter. This fellow bought that company, Twitter, okay, but the brilliant financial mind. So, but and now he learned about cash flow. They have to you have to pay do something like that. It doesn't come from, it doesn't rain money anymore. So what I think is happening now is, well, I don't know if you know, about bleeding, I'm sure you haven't because you're alive, people here, but usually when people start bleeding, they lose blood at period T+1. They have less blood at T+1 than they did at period T. You see, so now we have a phase of bleeding. What is bleeding? It means earning less than 4.75%. Because that's where short-term interest rates are. So if you're earning less than, say, about 5%, you're losing money. You have to borrow money, you got to pay 5% plus whatever risk premium, and if you can find someone foolish enough to lend you. Right? So that discount rate now is between 4 and 6%. So think about what we're facing now. That's called bleeding. Because if you're not making that, you're not making money. Not only you have to make money, but you can make more than that discount rate. The second part of this was a lot worse, is that people think that the Fed, having raised rates, has engaged in a temporary measure. No, Donald Trump is here. Okay, so the Fed is going to keep raising rates or keep rates higher than zero, okay, because they discovered that zero interest rate policy doesn't work. And another thing that people don't realize is that zero interest rate policy seemed to create some cosmetic growth, but it created a lot of inequality. And now people are talking about inequality. Who made money? Those people you see out there in restaurants in Miami overpaying for microscopic sushi. You can see it on the plate. So all these people, the people who made money, it created inequality because we had an asset-based inflation. All these years, assets were inflating like crazy. It's like a tumor, I think, is the best explanation, because that's typically what happened to organisms. You're happy with the growth, it's uncontrolled growth, and then boom. Our strategy at Universa does not depend on what we think of the stock market. So it doesn't change whether Brandon believes that it's going to be rosy forever and Mark, or whatever. It doesn't, or if you think that. So the strategy here is not about timing markets or environment. There's a structured policy of having geometric payoffs and the tails. But to go back to the environment, I believe that the stock market is way too overvalued for interest rates that are not 1%. So unless they miraculously bring back interest rate to 1%, which they won't be able to, you will have interest. It's unsustainable. Why should you put your money in a stock that gives you 2% dividend yield, if you're lucky, when you can get 4.75% from the bank while playing golf? Explain to me the logic, right? So this is why the stock market has to adjust to normal levels. And again, we haven't had that much growth over the past 25 years to justify this valuation. So it's just there. I think the problem is beyond inflation. The problem is the structure of the modern world in which we live. The structure of the modern world is overreactive because the world is getting more efficient because of globalization. So it's more reactive. You sell, say, 100 million year one and 100 million year two. Okay, the prices are going to be stable. But if you sell 0 year one and 200 million year two, you're going to have a huge explosion in prices. Because if you don't sell anything, things shrink, and they shrink rapidly. Capacity shrinks rapidly, and then you have bursts. So you have good news and bad news. The bad news is that things react very quickly. Look at what happened, how fast that these prices adjusted up after the recovery post-COVID. So the best of bad news. The good news is that all these squeezes resolve in gluts, and this is much faster than in the past. So let me give you an example. 1973, those of you who, not many were even toddlers then anyway. So 1973, there was an oil embargo. So you had a complete change of structure to accommodate higher oil prices. It took till 1981, 2, 3 for oil prices to become soft, and then eventually collapsed, and it destroyed the Soviet Union. Cars used to be, you could have this party in one car, and then they shrank dramatically, but it took a while. Today, the adjustment for Germany took 1 year. Putin played his game on Germany, thinking it was 1973, and look, I am, the Pasha. How long it took? 9 months later, you had a glut of gas, natural gas. So the adjustments are much faster today. The price of containers goes up dramatically, and then suddenly energy and stuff. So it's bicycles. We had a shortage when COVID came, and guess what? Now you try to buy a bicycle, they give you 2 with it. So you have these things. So this is why I think that we may have some softening in many prices, maybe not immediately labor, but doesn't solve the problem. We still will have interest rates higher than 2 or 3%, and we have to go back now to the real world. See, Warren Buffett is still alive, thank God. He will teach us how to invest. Okay. I think we may have a collapse in many prices. But I don't want to talk about inflation because it's a naive term. What is inflation? If it's the cost of goods and services. Now, how do you weigh them? Okay. You see what's your inflation may be different than mine. The price of wine has gone down because of so my inflation is, I have deflation for my goods. You may have inflation for your goods, depending on what you're. So when I wrote a paper on Bitcoin, when people say, "Oh, inflation," I said it depends on some individuals. It depends on preferences. It is unstable and has other problems like being short volatility because your basket changes all the time. So, but overall, housing is going to be cheaper. Lumber would be cheaper if you're into lumber, right? A lot of stuff would be cheaper. Commodities would be cheaper. But interest rates will not be 0.